Hello there, this is Dan. Quick preamble here. This episode deals with a discussion of three particular movies: the Poseidon Adventure, Jaws and Aliens. I just want to mention right at the start that if you haven't seen the Poseidon Adventure, and perhaps you haven't, as I guess you're a horror fan and it isn't really considered a horror film, but we thought it would be interesting to talk about, you might want to skip that section as we do give some spoilers for the movie. I will put time codes in the show notes so you know where to skip from and to. Also, I'd just like to mention that Stella talks about the book Hammer and Beyond in the main episode, and I've now bought it and started reading it, and it's great. So there's a recommendation for you. I'll hand over to our past selves in a moment for the full discussion, and just to mention, one of the movies we talk about, we did feel that we could say more about, so we are going to soon be releasing an episode focusing exactly on that movie, possibly very soon, so keep your eyes open. Alright, enjoy everybody.
Now the podcast starts.
Hello, dear listener, and welcome back to the podcast in which we talk about horror. Sometimes we talk about other things, and quite frequently we swear. I am delighted, after one episode away from the podcast, to be back this week and joined by all three of my wonderful regular co-hosts. So firstly we have Dr. Stella Gaynor. Hello, Stella.
You alright?
Oh, I'm delighted. It's wonderful to be back here to see you. Then, of course, we have Kirsty Warrow. Hello, Kirsty.
Hello.
Bless you.
It was very low.
Hello.
That was very stylish.
It was.
And last but not least, we have Ian Winterton. Hello, Ian.
Hello, Dan.
And dear listener, as Ian just suggested, I am Dan. I go under the name of TD Velasquez, but you're always free to call me Dan. Welcome to our show. This week, our theme is another question of horror. What is horror? Before we get on to the question, though, we have a little bit of news that we'd like to talk about. Stella, do you mind if I hand it over to you for this?
Yes, so anyone who's studied horror will have probably come across books by Peter Hutchings. Peter sadly died a couple of years back now, and one of his seminal books, Hammer and Beyond, has been re-released with a foreword written by the wonderful and very amusing Johnny Walker, and it is available through Manchester University Press, and it's on sale for only a tenner. So we're going to put a link in the show notes, and you can pick up Hammer and Beyond, the new version with the foreword from Johnny Walker, and it's a fantastic read. If you like Hammer films, any sort of horror scholarship, then it's fantastic, so grab it.
That's superb. I'm definitely going to be getting a copy of that. Fantastic.
Definitely.
That's great news, and that link will be in there. So before we get on to the main question, how are you all doing?
Good.
in words of one syllable or less.
One syllable or less.
Well, that's what
mine would be shh.
Oh dear. Oh no. I'm sorry to hear that.
You've been in a library.
Sadly not.
Well, under those circumstances, I'm especially grateful that you're joining us, Kirsty. Bless you for giving us your time.
I feel like I've been on holiday because for a few days, all I've been doing is painting a wall and listening to podcasts, and it's been like the best break I've ever had. Doing the school run and then painting, basically just painting. We had the plaster with it, and basically painting.
Not
wall.
community service.
No.
No, community service.
I was going to say, what kind of holidays do you go on that painting a wall is the thing that you do?
It's just so relaxing.
With Mr. Miyagi.
I've probably forgotten how to write, but it's been so nice not switching the computer on. But just, I've listened to all of the Catherine Bray's Tolkien. I've listened to my history podcasts. I've listened to quite a lot of Doctor Who podcasts.
Nerd.
All been good, and yeah, and we're actually launching a podcast with Cutaway Comics. So I'm going to be hosting a podcast.
Wow!
Well, you've learned from the best.
We've just lined up.
Yeah.
We've just lined up loads of guests. Interviewing. It's basically a sort of Desert Island Discs, but for Doctor Who. So you have to pick your 5. So it's basically very, very nerdy, but
Right.
very, very Doctor Who focused. But it's going to be fun.
Okay.
It's going to be fun.
And here begins the Ian Winterton podcast empire. As soon as you've got more than one podcast,
That's it.
Oh
no, the dam is broken.
no! This is your podcast now.
Bless you, Ian. Well, on that note, then let's move on to this week's chosen topic. So this is our return to our occasional strand of questions of horror, and the question is it horror? This came out of a discussion that the 4 of us had on the Facebook Messenger, just around whether or not certain films were horror films or not. And Ian suggested, why don't we pick 3 specific examples of a movie that might be considered horror in some aspects but not in others, and we'll just talk about it. The movies we've chosen are, I'll start with the earliest film, but it's also the least likely title to be discussed on a horror podcast. The Poseidon Adventure, which I mentioned mainly because I think it's scary. And then we're going to move, that's from 1972, then we're going to move on to 1975's Jaws.
Yay!
And super. And we're finally going to talk about Aliens from 1986. Now, Ian has taken Poseidon Adventure. Yeah, that's right, isn't it? Ian's done Poseidon Adventure, Stella's done Aliens, Kirsty's done Jaws. I've seen them all multiple times, and we should just be able to discuss them in general. So let's start with. Go on,
just
Kirsty.
interrupt? This description of done. I mean, I've not done an awful lot.
What do you mean?
You have assigned us responsibility for the discussion of a film, but I haven't really done anything other than a lot of marking over the last. So I want to just lower expectations for the listeners about what I'm going to contribute.
Okay, sure.
It's like
bless
Dan
you.
has said, you've been given these films and there will be a test.
Yeah.
I'm not ready for a test.
And the results of the test will be disseminated to the internet for the whole planet to listen to.
Oh, God.
Yes, absolutely. Well, let's just say that I know that you've all expended brain cells at a certain point on these films. Whether those brain cells are still alive now and you're able to call on them, that is what we will discover
We are going to
as
find
we
out.
go along. So let's
You
start
guys have
off
all
with
had the opposite week to me, haven't you? I've literally been blissed out, breathing in paint fumes, listening to podcasts, and it's been great. And you guys have been working like bastards.
Right.
Stop rubbing it in, Ian.
Right, bastards.
Literally just painting up and down, painty. My brain.
Yeah, you missed a bit.
Yeah, it's been like the nearest I get to Buddhism.
Wow. Well, we'll all have our moment. The Zen moment is coming for all of us, I'm sure. But this week it's just Ian who's got that pleasure.
Port bound.
Ladies and gentlemen, your attention, please. It is exactly 50 seconds to midnight. Hard left. Get up for Mayday. Happy New Year! Happy New Year!
only chance.
Don't listen to him! We've got to stay here till help arrives.
Help from where? From the captain? He's dead.
Tilted and he fell. The shaft blew up and he's dead. And that's it. Or do you want to make something more out of it?
Johnny, keep your eyes on the ladder. Don't look at anything except the ladder.
I want you to give this to our little grandson, huh?
Why, I'm going somewhere you're not going?
Hold it. Do you know what a flash fire is? Well, mister, I'm not going to let you kill us. I'm going through that door, Mr. Rogo. You can either stand aside and close that door to keep the air from coming in, or you can try to stop me. I was going to get everybody out of here, and damn it, I'm going to do it!
So, Stella, yes, you watched the Poseidon Adventure again. It kind of supports my own personal semi-belief that disaster movies are horror movies, because I find them frightening, particularly in this example. But you watched it again, having not seen it for a long time, but remembering being frightened by it. How did you find it?
It was longer than I remembered, which made me think, how did I sit through all that when I was a kid? And the answer to that is, I reckon I first watched it when I was a kid on one of those days where you were home from school sick. So I was just on the sofa and the Poseidon Adventure was on, so I watched all of it. I remember, I think, you know, when you put memories in your head that weren't really there. So I think I put bits in the film that weren't really there, or I put in, because there's so many parodies and spoofs of it, isn't there? Like there's one in The Simpsons and stuff that I'd probably put them in the film as well. But the bit where the boat tips and they're all in the ballroom, in my head that sequence was really long, really, really long. But when I watched it, last weekend I watched it, and it's about 5 minutes, if that. It's really, really short when the boat tips. And I thought that went on for ages, because in my child's mind, the bit where everyone's falling and being injured and being squashed by things, and the fella falls from the floor into the glass roof and all that kind of stuff, that was a really long, protracted scene, and it really stuck with me, and it really bothered me. And I think I would apply the same idea to the Towering Inferno, which we're not really going to talk about, but it's the idea of being trapped that really bothered me when I was a kid, because you've got all these set pieces of they're going to get through this bit and then they'll go over this obstacle, and they're kind of losing a person as they go every time. But it's that, and I'm not a claustrophobic person, but just the idea of it was being trapped that stuck in my head as a kid, and the visuals of everybody being physically hurt in the tipping sequence. And I'd also forgot that Leslie Nielsen. I'd forgot he was in it playing the captain.
I know, it's so weird as well, isn't it?
It's like, I know it's not meant to be funny, but I was sat here last weekend watching the Poseidon Adventure, and I was just howling, laughing at him just because of his voice. It's really not funny.
It's also because he's in Airplane, which is a spoof of
all
these films.
Disaster.
But this is the reason why he's in Airplane. It was the weird link which moved him from serious actor to comedy actor.
But I think that's the problem, isn't it, for us as at the age that we are, is that there's just no way that you can ever see him in a film and not just find it really weird.
Not laugh.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
just not laugh at him. He's just, I think he's just he's just become that comedy figure, and when he's trying to be serious and telling people to to turn about or whatever as they were doing, and I'm sat there
Yeah,
going,
I was waiting for the silly joke. Or,
yeah.
It's like it'd be like seeing Steve Martin in a serious film. It'd be like.
But on a rewatch, and I would guess I've not seen it for 30 years, it was really, really, really enjoyable. And all of those set pieces are fantastic. Absolutely fantastic.
It's brilliantly made, isn't
so
it?
I rewatched it, same as you, Stella, and I was expecting to be a bit bored.
So me too.
I don't know why, but I was absolutely gripped. And I was like, all the stuff you don't realise when you're a kid. Like, oh my God, all the religious stuff and all the characters were brilliant, and the engine of the story. God, it was. I guess there's a reason why it's lasted the test of time and gets shown so often, because it is a sort of movie that if you're watching it, if you turn on TV and it's on, you just kind of end up watching.
Yeah, you're just
even though it's 50 years old, nearly 50 years old.
God. I think that there's also the kind of the interesting the way that the title affects, I think, the way in which we think, or the kind of film we think it's going to be, and we feel, it's a Poseidon Adventure. It's like, it's it's thrilling and whatever. And I think for when I first saw it, I just wasn't expecting it. And I think this is, the answer to the question for me, is it horror? Is yes, it is, because it's not, it's very similar to a kind of haunted house narrative, but obviously we don't have, they're not monsters, but you've got a confined space, as Stella said, and characters are moving through, they're being picked off one by one by various kind of things. Lots of people suffer horrible deaths. And ultimately it's the kind of the kind of goodies who make it through, the people who you feel as an audience are are worthy of surviving this ordeal.
Well, in a way though, but it's but it also is really good because I disagree there, because it actually kills lots of good people.
Oh yeah. But then that's what horror does, though, right? It's,
but
feel like
I don't
it's
think
a loss.
We're not talking about Jurassic Park, but one of the things I always didn't like about Jurassic Park, I like lots of things about Jurassic Park, is it really killed people that deserve to be killed all the way through it. And Poseidon Adventure is brilliant at killing innocent people, and it kills people you really like. I mean, and it made me realise, oh my God, there's a reason. Because when I was talking to Kelly, my wife, before I said, I've got to watch this for the podcast, and she was like, and she just came out with all these different scenes, and I was like, and I can remember all this. None of us had watched it since it was on TV in our childhood, and how much it affected us, the claustrophobia, and when oh God, what's her name? Shirley MacLaine. It's Shirley MacLaine, isn't it?
Shirley Winters.
Shirley MacLaine. Almost right. Yeah, when Shirley Winters dies.
Shirley Winters.
Bernie Winters. Shirley Winters.
Surely you can't be serious, but that's a callback.
That's what it is.
Shirley.
Yeah, that's Bernie Winters' wife, wasn't it? That's why she wasn't wearing an emu.
Gone over my head.
Oh, Kylie, I laughed at that.
You don't know who Bernie Winters is?
No,
he's Bernie Winters horror.
Right. Okay, is it horror?
You need to Google Bernie Winters, because I think he's a sort of in the tradition of the lycanthrope, but he's half man, half emu.
Okay. My God, that sounds terrifying.
Not Rod Hull.
Okay.
Not Rod Hull.
Okay, so
anyway, I don't know how I
because we're gonna well,
but yeah, when Shirley Winters died, I remember so clearly the paranoia of the swimming, people being mean about her because she was fat. I remember feeling that was horrible, and people going, "I'm not going." I just remember the woman going, I'm not going after fat ass," and I just remember that so clearly. And then she's so lovely and she's so brave, and then she died. I remember that as a kid, you just like, what am I being allowed to watch?
I watched that scene like half an hour ago, and that's so awful. The fact that she does the heroic deed but then dies afterwards. Unrelatedly, really. Related by the exertion.
But as a story, it feeds into, the Gene Hackman character basically being tested. It's a big test of his faith. It's she does all the right things, and then God gives her a heart attack, and kills her anyway. And but for some reason I hadn't remembered Gene Hackman's sort of Christ-like thing at the end. I somehow didn't remember that, but that's quite amazing, isn't it? Yeah. It's pretty amazing as well. I mean, God, it's so good.
Yeah. Let's just talk about the generic placement of it for a minute then. So, Kirsty, you said that you'd agree that it's horror, and I agree with your reasons. I'd also say that with disaster movies in general, I know that all of them aren't like this, but the reason I kind of edge towards calling disaster movies horror, they tend not to have a human villain. So if it was an action movie or a thriller, there'd be human villains who can be overcome. But it's like the villain in a disaster movie is normally like an elemental force, whether it's an avalanche or something that's effectively superhuman. And the story is about surviving it rather than beating it. I think that's quite horror-ish. With Poseidon Adventure specifically as well, I think I'll just come to you in a second, Ian. I can understand the kind of both action movies and disaster movies belong to like the genre of spectacle. But with Poseidon Adventure, for instance, there isn't a lot of spectacle in it. I think it looks amazing, but if it was a spectacle or a blockbuster action movie, I think you'd see a lot more shots of the ship in the sea. You'd see a bit more wide shots of like the amazing, because the whole point of the film is that the ship capsizes, so all the sets are upside down, and you'd expect like a couple of cool like wide shots or tracking shots through the sets to make you go, wow, that looks amazing. There's nothing like that. You never really get a sense of the design of the ship. You see it almost from the point of view of the characters in it. To them, it's just like a nightmare that they're trapped in. So those two things, I think, mean it's not really aligned with the genre of spectacle or action.
You just reminded me of the Descent. One of my one of my many podcasts I've listened to. I've been listening to lots of Jed Shepherd's, which for some reason I hadn't listened to before. So I listened to the one with Stephen Volk that sort of ended up leading to a host. But then one of them was with Neil Marshall, my nemesis, and but just talking about the whole. About how amazing Descent was, and it is amazing. But that's one of the reasons Poseidon Adventure works, is because you don't get to see outside. It is from the point of view of you're trapped in the ship, and actually a ship is loads of tiny claustrophobic corridors.
Well, with that in mind, then, because Dan, you said it doesn't have the spectacle. There is a remake of it, right? Does that have spectacle?
I haven't seen it.
I reviewed it when it came out, and you know what? I can't.
You didn't like it.
I can remember so little about it. But you know what? I do remember thinking there's lots of CGI and lots of sweeping shots.
Right, so they put that in.
Fergie from the Black Eyed Peas is in it, and then I literally can't remember anything else other than when the boat turns over, it looks like a whole bunch of CGI.
Oh dear!
Hitting a boat. But I really can't remember. I mean, it was 15 years ago or whatever. I can't remember anything else about it.
I watched the first 5 minutes of it when it was on telly, and obviously that's before the ship turns over and everything. But just the way they were filming the ship on a normal day, it was sweeping aerial shots.
Yeah,
it was spectacle. You know, I mean, it's post James Cameron's Titanic, isn't it? I think. And that's a movie that is a disaster movie, but is also clearly going for the spectacle. Sorry, Kirsty, you were going to say?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to come back to that idea about disaster movies as horror, and the thing for me, I think that differentiates, for me is the deciding thing is whether or not the disaster feels like it's a thing that could happen. So for me, the reason why Poseidon Adventure is clearly horror is because within the context of the film it all feels very kind of believable that this this cruise ship could, go down, and that would be horrible for the people who are trapped on board. Whereas if you take, I mean, I know it's not a good example of the genre, but the other end of something like 2012 or whatever, Moonfall or whatever.
Yeah.
It's clearly going for.
No spoilers. I've not seen Moonfall.
Yeah.
There's the Moonfall.
The moon falls.
But when they're kind of going for just ridiculous big spectacle, and there's no sense that. Yeah. Actually, that the kind of representation of the end of the world or whatever happens, the disaster is just so clearly in the realms of fantasy. It ceases to become horrific because it's really difficult to pitch yourself in that situation.
The idea isn't scary because the idea is nonsense.
Yeah, exactly. So as long as the disaster, again, it's been years since I've seen Towering Inferno, but. We unfortunately have recent precedents of, where that is clearly a thing that people have had to deal with and with horrific consequences. So, the kind of the horrorness of that just seems more readily apparent because it's more clearly based in the real world and things that could happen and have happened.
You could be trapped in there.
Yeah.
Well, I remember going over to France and it was proper. I've never been in a storm like it. It was proper people falling over, vomiting. I mean, the vomit. There's literally everyone vomiting everywhere. It's fucking horrible. But it was the Poseidon Adventure, but also the real life Herald of Free Enterprise hadn't been too long.
Right.
So the news reports of that I don't think my parents sent to stop me listening to anything.
That was the ship that capsized in the Channel, wasn't it?
Yeah. The Herald of Free Enterprise, and the news reports of that, of people falling to their deaths down corridors. Which was, and then when you're there as a, probably maybe I was 12, 13, and the Poseidon Adventure and Bernie Winters' wife or whatever her name is, swimming. Shelley Winters. Shelley Winters' death was there. I remember now we're talking about it. And I remember that was in my head, that having to swim. And I think about, actually, I was saying this to my wife the other day. Every time I go swimming and swim underwater and hold my breath, I have. If I was in the Poseidon Adventure, could I get to the other side? And because you have to. And I realise that's one of those little things that's in your head, and it's always there in my head every single time I swim underwater.
Wow.
Which is kind of a bit like, a bit like we'll come on to talk about Jaws, but it's a bit like every time you're in the ocean. There's a
segue there, isn't there?
Yes, and I think we should take that on. So it sounds like we're leaning towards, we think the Poseidon Adventure is horror.
Well, I was about to say it's almost like that's why I'd say, with a dissenting voice for a change, I'd say that's probably why the phrase disaster movie exists, because I think it's quite a specific thing. I think it'd be weird if this was in the horror movie section. Is it horror? Yeah. But I do agree. There are so many of the tick box of what is horror, and one thing I wouldn't be able to go through every single horror movie, disaster movie, but Towering Inferno and Poseidon have one of the components of a horror movie, which is what they call monster in the house and the save the cat sort of screenwriting bollocks.
Oh yeah, I saw the cat being saved.
Yeah. Alien fits into this as well, not Aliens, and Alien, but also Aliens fits into this, is that you have to have a sin. You have to have a human sinning, and then everyone dies so it's not just the Poseidon Adventure, isn't just water, it's because it's somebody's fault. They make a big deal of establishing, the modern version of the Engineer and the Titanic.
At
the beginning, and the Towering Inferno similarly has got a sort of because it was us talking about the Towering Inferno and Aliens as having the same shape that sort of led to this podcast, was they have a sort of Burke character in Towering Inferno. You have Rich, my son's going to be such an anti-capitalist, because we go, he's a money man, he's a baddie, because that is like such a repeated trope. In the movies we watch, especially the dinosaur movies like Jurassic Park. Yeah. If he's a money man, then he's a baddie and he's going to get eaten by the T-Rex. on the toilet or whatever.
And
every disaster movie has that. So
yeah.
It's,
and like I say, you know, they don't have human villains, but they have kind of human sub-villains.
Yeah,
people who cause the disaster to begin.
Somebody's let the monster in this case, the ocean.
Yeah. So let's use that segue then back to where we're going to, because of course the monster in Jaws, the human villain who makes everything worse, is again the money man, the mayor.
The mayor.
There is a creature alive today who has survived millions of years of evolution without change, without passion, and without logic. It lives to kill. A mindless eating machine. It will attack and devour anything. It is as if God created the devil and gave him jaws. This is Universal's extraordinary motion picture version of Peter Benchley's best-selling novel, Jaws.
I just found out that a girl got killed here last week. And you knew it. You knew there was a shark out there. You knew it was dangerous. But you let people go swimming anyway. Did you see that?
You yell barracuda. Everybody says, huh? What? You yell shark. We've got a panic on our hands on the 4th of July.
Is it true that most people get attacked by sharks in 3 feet of water, about 10 feet from the beach?
Yeah. What we are dealing with here is a perfect engine. An eating machine.
We're not only going to have to close the beach, we're going to have to hire somebody to kill the shark.
Bad fish. But I'll catch him and kill him.
Did you hear your father? Out of the water now!
This shark, swallow you whole. You're gonna need a bigger boat.
That's a 20-footer.
25. 3 tons on them.
Hurry up, he's coming straight for us. Don't screw it up now. Don't wait for me. Now! Shoot!
None of man's fantasies of evil can compare with the reality of Jaws. Roy Scheider, Robert Shaw, Richard Dreyfuss, Jaws. See it before you go swimming.
So, 1975 Jaws, the movie that really gave us Steven Spielberg. Some people would consider it an adventure movie. Again, I think it's a horror movie. But Kirsty, what do you think?
Here's the thing. I was a bit more convinced with Poseidon about being a horror movie, whereas I'm a little bit more on the fence, I think, with Jaws. I think Jaws clearly has horrific elements, and like my daughter, who is 10, but she's sort of started to get into movies when she was sort of 6 or 7, and one of the ones that she, you know, kind of very early on, obviously because there'd been discussions at school, was Jaws. Can we watch Jaws? And I was like, oh, I'm not sure you're ready for it. And she's like, no, I am. So I think when I first attempted it with her, she was 9, I think, and we got as far as the boy on the beach, or the boy in the water.
That's the worst bit.
And then we just she could not continue. So I think like the first
blown away by that dolly's loop.
Yeah. Yeah. But
oh my god,
yeah.
just...
So I think the kind of, you know, the beginning of it is clearly kind of horror, isn't it? Young people taking drugs and doing things they shouldn't, and then, you know, dying.
Skinny dipping. There's a sin.
Skinny whore archetypes going in the water. Outrageous, yeah. So that's clearly kind of very horror-esque. And I think every time we have the sequences for the shark, and this from the shark's point of view, it feels very stalkery and slashery, and kind of in that kind of territory. The lurking presence, which is kind of very horrific. But on the whole, I think the success of the film is more for me about the kind of interaction between the characters. With Quentin, Richard Dreyfuss, or whatever on the boat.
I agree. That's what makes it great.
Yeah, that's what makes it kind of interesting and compelling film, is about these three men as they set out, and the kind of the worlds and the relationships that they leave behind, and the kind of quest to protect societies. I know that lots of people feel very strongly that Jaws absolutely is a horror film, but for me, it just it starts as a horror and it kind of ends as a horror, but the middle is kind of not horror. Generally.
Okay, I mean, I agree with your statements about the characters making it special, but I think it's absolutely true. But I don't think that stops it from being horror. I think
the horror genre has plenty of other examples of characters you like hanging out with, as well as it being a horror film.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm still. I think it's sort of built in. It's got the same shape as a horror movie in lots of ways. And it is definitely a monster in the house, and it's it's a killer shark, and it makes you, and it's got jump scares that most horror films would kill for. I think what it is, I think it's because it's is it a PG? Jaws?
Yes.
I think it's the one everyone's the most surprised it's a PG. Everyone who's I remember when I was going, we'll just watch Jaws with the kids, and my wife went mental. And I went, it's PG. So, what you can say? It's the same as arachnophobia.
which is definitely a horror film, by the way.
Yeah. I remember watching Arachnophobia and shitting my pants because I don't like spiders.
I remember trying to watch Arachnophobia at the cinema and going after 10 minutes, get me out! And my brother had to take me home.
The thing for me is if Jaws was actually not, if it was called, I don't know, Beak or Beaks, if it was about octopuses, then we'd be having a very different conversation about whether or not it wasn't a horror movie, because it absolutely fucking would be.
Right.
Well, this is why
suddenly much more Lovecraftian suddenly.
Well, no, I just hate octopus.
Yeah.
I don't like them either. I think I'm not frightened of them, but I think they're just in the weird, and I want nothing to do with them box.
Do you know what? I'm not watching. I remember being slightly freaked out by a documentary about a deep sea octopus, and it was a man wrestling. It was wrestling with a giant octopus, and it was quite horrible to watch. He was sort of having this is real, it's not a movie, it was a documentary. There was a diver, and it was just black everywhere, and there was a massive octopus just basically ripping him. And then he said he's got a bit too I don't think he's playing anymore. And the narration was like they had to come in and intervene, because it's almost like the octopus had stopped playing with him and was about to kill him, and it was massive. And actually, maybe looking at Kirsty's face, Kirsty looks absolutely traumatized. Maybe this is the monster movie that hasn't been made yet. We've had alligators, we've had piranhas, we've had sharks.
No,
massive
I can't
tentacles.
even. I struggle with Finding Nemo 2 or whatever it's called. Finding Dory.
Not seen that either.
What about 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea with a squid?
No.
Yeah.
Oh wow.
That's definitely a horror sequence.
This is a common phobia, because that would be brilliant. Octopuses.
I'm really shocked that the Asylum has not done 10 million of them. I mean, isn't there a movie called Sharktopus?
Oh yeah, there is, but I've not seen it.
Right.
Of course, yeah.
I'm sure it looks like crap.
Yeah.
Sorry, who did I just talk over then? Sorry, was it Stella or Ian? I think.
I don't know. If it's me, then that's fair game. Because people.
Well, On that note, with Jaws, then we seem like we're a bit more on the fence with it being horror. I still think it is.
I'd be more likely to say it was horror than Poseidon Adventure. As in, Poseidon Adventure is clearly a disaster movie, whereas Jaws is a monster movie.
But Jaws
which
has
is
a
more
monster,
into the which edges more into the horror in my brain.
And it has gore, and it has a head with its eyeball ripped out in it and stuff like that.
All right.
And jump scares, like amazing amounts of jump scares. And I guess a bit like the Poseidon Adventure, I have literally thought about Jaws every time I've got in the ocean or even a swimming pool as a kid.
See, I haven't.
See, I don't get in the ocean. I just don't get in the sea.
What, because of Jaws?
Because of everything in the sea.
Everything in the sea.
Makes sense.
All of it.
The kaiju?
Nope. Absolutely. I won't get in the sea.
Well,
no.
My biggest Jaws freaking me out and ruining a good time was in Jamaica. I was swimming and I was singing that Pixie song. I was swimming in the Caribbean and I was literally living my best life over a shallow coral reef. And this wasn't just Jaws, because I'd also seen a documentary with David Attenborough, and it showed they had some meat, and they were in the dark, and they basically showed they were in the edge of the reef in the documentary, and then the ocean disappearing away into the darkness, and they had this meat hanging there, and this great white just came out really, really fast out of nowhere and chopped the meat, and then they said, and this was speeded up 100 times. So I watched that probably a month or whatever before, and then obviously I was swimming in this thing. Every time I saw a grey fish out of the corner of my eye, it ruined my vibe. And I was suddenly going, shit, it's a shark. No, it's not a shark. It's a beautiful fish. And I was swimming, and then I suddenly got caught in a bit of water. You know, it started pushing me over, and I suddenly went off the edge, and I was in deep ocean. Suddenly, so I had Jaws and this documentary. How fast a great white comes up at the edge of reefs for anything that goes over the edge, and it totally. And it was beautiful. I had to swim in panic back to the shore.
Oh yeah,
and it was.
I would panic like mad in that situation.
You know, and it's just, and I've never seen a shark in real life. I know people that have. It's just like I just can't imagine how scary that must be, just how fast they can move. And then, but it's just that idea of something underneath your feet when you're swimming.
Exactly.
Pull down at any minute.
Don't get
Stella, I like your consistency. I think we've established that you are the Chief Brody of this podcast. I'm reminded of the line from Jaws. It doesn't make much sense for a man who hates the sea to live on an island. And Brody says, it's only an island if you look at it from the water.
That's true.
On that note, as it's brought us to Stella, that's beautiful. Let's talk about aliens for the last 10-15 minutes of this podcast.
Just tell me one thing, Burke. You're going out there to destroy them, right? Not to study, not to bring back, but to wipe them out.
That's the plan.
All right, people, on the ready line. Are you me? Yeah! Are you me? Yeah! Are you? Get on the ready line, Marine! Get something to die! Get on the ready line! Get your light up here.
Keep back, don't scare her.
Movement! Talk to me, Hudson!
I got signals. I got readings in front and behind.
There's nothing back here.
Look, I'm telling you, there's something moving and it ain't us.
Get them out of there!
How could they cut the power, man? They're animals.
There's movement all over the place.
5 meters, man. 4.
aliens. This time, it's war.
So, Aliens from 1986, James Cameron's sequel to Alien. Is it a sci-fi movie, an action movie, a horror movie, a bit of all three? I think it's a horror film with lots of guns in it. I nearly said action movie, but that was a Freudian slip. Stella, what would you like to say about Aliens? Well, yes, indeed.
It was a blur, wasn't it, Stella? Because you would drink loads of tequila.
Well, I was going to say, in the effort to be as transparent with our listeners as we can, and I always feel that we should be honest, I posed to my husband the other week, because we were going to be doing this. I was like, I need to watch a couple of films for the podcast. We can watch Poseidon Adventure or Aliens. And I said, you choose. And he said, Aliens. Is that right? Great. So I'll watch Aliens. And then we eventually got around to putting the film on, and it was quite late, and I had been at the wine, and Aliens is quite long. So after the wine, I opened the tequila, and it's a bit fuzzy. I remember there was lots of corridors. There was lots of Ripley going and shaking her head at people. There was.
There's also an eye roll there that obviously
because she was disappointed in you, Stella. That's what it was.
Probably, and rightly so. There was lots of guns. There was lots of people firing, not in short, controlled bursts. People firing their machine guns all over the place, and I remember saying to Owen, I've seen this loads of times before. Well, I don't know why I needed to rewatch it, and clearly I rewatched it, and I don't really remember much of it. But I would say, from all of my past memories and 2 weeks ago's drunken memory, I would say it is firmly a horror sci-fi.
Okay, firmly.
Firmly. With a bit of action.
Where does action not factor into it then?
Well, I mean, surely there's. I don't know.
I think I think it. You could show it to an action movie fan who likes gun shooting, and they'll get gun shooting.
Yeah.
But at the same time, Ian was mentioning in the messaging, to what extent is a film horror or another genre? And I think one way to work it out is that you remove the genre element. Does the film still stand up as a story? So for Jaws, for instance, if you take the shark out of it and it's just a movie about
at the beach.
Well, they wouldn't. Well, for a start, Quinton and the other two would never get on the same boat and never talk to each other. Mm-hmm. They'd just be pushed into that situation. With Aliens, yeah, it's a movie about soldiers on a mission essentially, but they're going to go up against their mission is to save a colony from this horrific alien creature which has a horrific lifestyle. Loads of innocent people have died. And you could take the soldiers out of it and the guns, and the story would still work, as in just some people going up against this hideous alien. I know it would be
Alien
work.
3 though, and that was shit.
Yeah, well, no, it would be Alien 1, because that was Alien 1.
Oh yeah, I know.
You know, so that's why I would argue that it's horror. I mean, a lot of it, for my personal taste, comes down to, am I frightened by this or not?
Well, I was going to say I'm not frightened by aliens at all, because they're not real. And
I
really am scared by drowning and sharks.
Yeah, but with Aliens, I think I first watched it when I was about 18, 19.
Mm-hmm.
So, it being an alien, it wasn't going to frighten me at that age. If I'd have watched it when I was a kid, I'm sure it would have done, and it might have held a similar place like Poseidon Adventure and Jaws, because I did see them when I was a kid. But because I watched it when I was quite old, it was just like aliens and guns and rather than it being scary. So I think I think an overriding theme of all of these, for me anyway, how I feel about them and my reaction to them, a lot of that depends on how old I was when I saw it. Because when I saw Jaws as a kid, I shat myself. Of course I did. Everybody did.
You don't want to do that either, because they smell that and come and get you.
Yeah. But I don't go in the sea though, do I? So it's fine.
It's fine.
It'll come onto your sofa.
The beaches are just lined with sharks who can smell Stella But
I don't like where this is going.
Can I also?
That's a bit personal. I do apologise, Stella.
There's also this is another reason why I don't like octopuses. They can come out of the ocean and come and get you.
Oh, some of them, yeah, that were those ones that creep across. That one, the land octopus.
Yeah, and then get out of spaces while making themselves ready.
They've been seen in Cheshire, you know.
Seen where?
In Cheshire.
In Cheshire.
In Cheshire, have they? Well, that's good because I'm not in Cheshire. I'm in Shropshire, so that's fine. We'll just build a wall.
Heading towards Shropshire.
They'll get through a crack in the wall. They'll climb over it.
Yeah.
Literally no defences in a landlocked.
Yeah, but I will say about Aliens anyway is even though it is one of my favourite films, so not being scared of the aliens doesn't mean that I don't think it's an amazing film.
But also, I feel like I have to ask this question though. I mean, we're on a horror podcast, and this is about episode 76. Am I the only person in the group who's capable of being frightened by something that's made up? Because I think that kind of applies to lots of
because well, we believe what it is, Dan, is I don't know about you, but I believe in a lot of things.
That's not true.
So you know, I'm terrified by The Exorcist. I'm terrified by American Werewolf in London.
Yeah,
just not terrified by aliens.
Okay, but the reason can't be that it's because you know it's not real.
No,
it must be something else.
No, because I'm a completely irrational being. Yeah. It's. I mean, but I absolutely love Aliens. But I think I really do love it on a action. The suspense comes from you don't want to see other people. You know, oh my God, they're going to get hurt. They're going to get killed. And there are obviously horror elements, chest bursting and all that sort of stuff. But they're more hangovers from Alien, which is a horror film. Alien.
Yeah, which is scary.
And it's weird because I find Alien scary. So you're right to push at that sort of thing because it's not. I find Alien scary, and I still don't believe in xenomorphs when I'm watching that either. So there must be something in the tone and the vibe of you know, and the filmmaking.
They clearly angled it towards away from horror because Cameron stated that he thought Ridley Scott had done that perfectly and he couldn't top it. So that's why it is more of an action film.
But doing Vietnam in space is, you know, it's basically it's got more in common with Zulu or something. It's a load of people and a marauding enemy. But they're aliens, so it's. You know, so it's more PC. And
I also think Zulu's quite frightening.
Yeah, no, but it is, but it's also offensive because it's like a great, like Black Hawk Down or something. It's a great massive of the people, whereas this is aliens. We don't give a shit about aliens, and also. But also, they kind of act like a force of nature because that is one of the things about the alien, about the xenomorph, is they don't fuck each other over for a percentage. They act in a uniform way. Like, you know, it could be flying sharks. Basically, they do what they do. They're natural, and the humans are in that position because of human greed. Yeah. So in some ways, it does fit. It does fit.
Or to bring us back, it brings us back to the disaster movie, horror movie parallels, doesn't it? Because it's the force of nature with the human sub-villains, and you know it could be a wall of water, as in the Poseidon Adventure or whatever. So, okay, so I think to round that up, then I think discussing those three particular films, we were fairly clear on the Poseidon Adventure being horror, so therefore that's a recommendation for horror fans who might not have thought they would want to watch the Poseidon Adventure. Jaws is pretty horror-ish, I think. I think we're split on that. And Aliens, angling more towards the sort of action sci-fi realm. I think.
It's a bit like would you say Starship Troopers was a horror? You wouldn't, would you?
No.
And Aliens is virtually the same, really. A bit of chest bursting aside.
I disagree, because I think you care about the people in Aliens and you don't care about the people in Starship Troopers. Starship Troopers is a satire.
You.
What?
All right.
I do.
I care about Casper, whatever his face is, and Neil Patrick.
Casper Van Dien.
That's him.
Future Nazis have feelings too.
Neil Patrick Harris. I always care about Neil Patrick Harris.
I mean, even when he's in the Gestapo, yeah.
Especially then.
God, is that Neil Patrick Harris? Do you know what? Because he's been in Doctor Who. Everyone said he's coming up and he's in Doctor Who. I've realised how much I don't know who he is. I've heard this name. I've never watched How I Met Your Mother. I didn't realise he was Doogie Howser, and I also didn't realise he was in Starship Troopers. I'm a fucking idiot.
He's also in this series of unfortunate events.
And and I've seen that, and I didn't recognise him because of all the prosthetics. I literally have had a Neil Patrick Harris blind spot. And now he's going to basically single-handedly revive Doctor Who, make it global.
He's also in Gone Girl as a rather lovely cameo.
Oh, is he?
I've seen that as well, but I didn't know who he was till he was in It's a Sin, and he was amazing.
Is he in It's a Sin? I still haven't watched that, and I don't know.
That's amazing.
But I had no idea
he's
he
in
was
that.
in.
That was the first time I actually knew his name and recognised his face and knew he was a person. So... You're like my mother. Is that a person who's famous and everyone on the planet knows?
Well, randomly on this podcast about Is It Horror, we end by talking about Neil Patrick Harris, who is definitely not horrific.
Oh no.
Ian, Stella, Kirsty, thank you all so much. We have discussed 3 movies at the edge of the horror genre, and it's quite fun and interesting. I think we should return to the question of Is it horror and pick some other examples. In the future.
Care Bear the movie. Just randomly pick them out of the...
I think Stella has a suggestion.
It's not a suggestion, it's just something I wanted to plug. So I mentioned my friend's forward in his book at the start, and I'd also like to say that my book is now published and is out and available to buy. So it's available Amazon, Waterstones, wherever, or you can get it direct from Palgrave Macmillan. Spring of Nature, my book is out and it's there. So if anybody works in a college or a school or a university, please get it in your library and well, read it if you want, but at least get it in the library so that I can get some.
Next time I'm a visiting lecturer, I will. Next time I'm a visiting lecturer and they ask me, they always seem to ask you.
Yeah,
when you
get it in the library.
Kirsty,
get it in the college.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Fantastic. I will put the link in the show notes as well. Stella, what's the name of your book?
Rethinking Horror in the New Economies of Television.
Rethinking Horror in the New Economies of Television. Is It Horror is going to be the follow-up book?
Yeah.
One page.
One page. No.
One word. The first ever one-word book. Everything you do, Stella, makes history.
Octopuses.
I'll do it as a haiku.
All right, well, I think that brings us neatly to the end of the episode. Thank you so much, everybody.
Nice one.
Thank you.
Dear listener, thank you for listening. We shall be back next month, and possibly a few times in between, who knows. We're not keeping any kind of tight schedule at the moment. That's just the way we are rolling as it goes. Thank you, everybody.
Natural coming out of your mouth.
You got to pull that off.
Did it not? Well, you know what?
And West Side.
It's a non-edit point, isn't it? We'll leave that one in.
Non-edit point.
Thank you, everybody. This has been so much fun.
Thanks,
just
man.
Next time.
Just gathering
on. Just going on one on each other. Just fade away.
Out.
Still going.
It's just like a shout now.
They haven't shut up yet.
This is what happens when podcasters haven't podcasted for a bit.
Yeah.
Okay.
Fade out on Kirsty's cackle.
Bye.
Yeah. Oh, thanks.
Oh dear, oh dear.
You have been listening to And Now the Podcast Starts. Produced and released by Ambidextrous Solutions Limited. Presented by Kirsty Warrow, Ian Winterton, T.D. Velasquez, and Stella Gamer. Special thanks to Greg Hume for our original theme music and to Brian Gorman for our original artwork. All dialogue and music clips from films, TV shows, and trailers are used for the purposes of criticism, in the spirit of fair dealing as defined in UK law, and fair use as defined in US law. No copyright infringement is intended. Please visit our home on the web, www.andnowpodcast.com, for more content and contact details. Or visit our Facebook pages at @AndNowPod or at @LeeCushingPod. Follow us on Twitter at @AndNowPodcast or at @LeeCushingPodcast. If you'd like to donate to us, please visit patreon.com/AndNowPodcast. And now the podcast stops.